Hi, I'm Derek Lido, host of From the Ground Up, a show that uncovers the not-so-secret strategies of owners of bedrock businesses. Featuring conversations with entrepreneurs who built influential companies, we're going to take a deep dive into how successful businesses are created without having to shoot for the moon or take unnecessary risk. In this show, we're going to teach you how many great companies are built from the ground up. Welcome to From the Ground Up. I'm your host, Derek Lido, and on today's show, we welcome Ken Marlin, the managing partner and founder of Marlin & Associates, an award-winning mergers and acquisition-focused investment bank headquartered in New York City, with offices in Washington, D.C. and Toronto. And Ken is also the author of The Marine Corps Way to Win on Wall Street, 10 Key Principles from the Battlefield to the Boardroom. And Ken, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show today. I've been really looking forward to talking with you again.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. This should be fun.
Yeah, well, you were skilled as a Marine and trained as a Marine, and you credit them with a great deal of your entrepreneurial success. And sort of why is that?
Look, I think you are the author of 2 books on entrepreneurship, and have certainly spoken to a fairly wide range of entrepreneurs, as have I in a different context. And I'm not sure. In fact, I don't believe that there's any one clear path to being an entrepreneur. And certainly, I've seen people who've come from a wide range of backgrounds, a wide range of educations, a wide range of skill sets who have been successful entrepreneurs, and some of it may just be in the blood. I do credit the Marine Corps with helping to develop in me a set of skills that helped me be successful as a business executive before I was an entrepreneur, and has helped me to lead the firm that I lead now. I had somebody at one point say, so everything you've ever learned, you took all of your Marine Corps skills and you applied them to running a business. And I said, no, I didn't exactly take all of my Marine Corps skills. Marine Corps taught me never to stop in a kill zone, and I don't know how to apply that to running my business. And they taught me how to field strip an M60 machine gun, and I don't know how to apply that either. But they did teach me a number of skills that I do think have helped me be successful in running businesses, whether or not as an entrepreneur. I've then leveraged those with, I think, my own desires to not have a boss, and it made me a bit more entrepreneurial.
Yeah. Well, you also learned this, and became a skilled investment banker, and that's in your business now. But you learned investment banking before you started Marlin and Associates, and so where did that skill come from?
An interesting question. While I was in the Marine Corps, they allowed me to pursue my MBA on the West Coast in your old stomping ground at UCLA, and I focused there on business strategy for a simple, if misguided, reason, which is that I had done a lot of strategy work while in the Marine Corps. I worked for the commanding general of 1st Marine Division and did some strategy work. I helped train Marines in developing Marine Corps strategies, and I mistakenly assumed that coming out of the Marine Corps and coming out with an MBA that I would be able to apply strategy development skills in the civilian world. What I found after a whole long series of frustrating interviews was that most corporations only hire one of 2 types of people into strategy roles. They either hire people who used to be at Bain, McKinsey, BCG, or some consulting company, because they are supposedly trained in corporate strategies, or they hire people that have been part of the corporation for some time and have demonstrated a knowledge of the company and an ability to think strategically. And I fit in neither of those categories coming out of the Marine Corps. I was fortunate to get a job with Dun & Bradstreet at a time when Dun & Bradstreet was being operated much the way Warren Buffett leverages Berkshire Hathaway. D&B was using the Dun & Bradstreet credit information business as a vehicle to make a number of acquisitions in the business information and technology space. And I got a job really working for the CFO of D&B, essentially as a troubleshooter, but he promised me that at some point I'd be able to work in the strategy development area. And that did come to pass about a year later, at a time when D&B was very busy with acquisitions. And then, with no strategic forethought at all, they threw me into the acquisition game, mostly focused on deals outside of the United States for the simple, if not all that logical reason that I was single and willing to travel. And it had little to do with my skill set at the time, other than I think I had demonstrated at the time an ability to operate independently, an ability to think strategically, and a willingness to take on things that I didn't know all that much about. And that sort of grew into about 60 transactions that I was involved with, and trial by fire, learning how to do mergers and acquisitions.
But that's a classic, because virtually all successful entrepreneurs learn their key, skill, marketable skill on the job, and usually with under some advisor or mentor or boss that lets them, get good at something. And 60 transactions, I imagine you were pretty savvy there. But
I certainly got thrown into the deep end of the pool, and it was sink or swim. And I think I survived more often than I didn't. I clearly made some mistakes in that period. I saw mistakes made, but I also made mistakes. I think early in my time doing things, I tried too hard to eliminate risk. I think early in my time, I allowed lawyers to tell me what I couldn't do. It was at least one transaction that I wish we had gotten done, and looking back on it, we clearly over-negotiated it. Mm-hmm. But they were lessons to learn.
So now you started Marlin and Associates, okay, an investment bank. So that's one of the scariest businesses of all time to start, is an investment bank, right? And the myth is that this is really a business that only heirs to great fortunes start, and or people coming out of Goldman Sachs with Rolodexes from 20 years of having done deals, and that doesn't describe you in the least. You started Marlin and Associates with no investment at all.
It's true. I certainly don't fit the mold of most investment bankers, and it's true that it's more than a myth. Most investment banks get started by what I do call the X's. They're ex-Goldman Sachs, ex-Morgan Stanley, ex-Credit Suisse, ex-JP Morgan, and they get 3 or 4 guys together next to the train station in Greenwich or wherever and leverage their Rolodex. And I did not start that way. When I was at Dun & Bradstreet doing all those deals, we interacted quite a lot with investment banks, both large ones. We had Goldman Sachs on retainer and dealt with many of the big investment banks. And we also dealt with the small boutiques. And I most definitely at the time thought that I liked the small boutiques, particularly those with vertical expertise. I found that many of the bankers that we saw, and many of them from both large and small, were smart guys. They were smart. They were quick on their feet. They understood the principles of valuation and negotiation and deal structuring and the like. But they didn't really understand what we did for a living, and they didn't understand why we should do something or why we shouldn't transact for the most part. But there were a few that were different. There were a few that actually did understand the industry we served. They were strategic in their thinking, and they really were more like trusted advisors than they were sort of like brokers trying to bring together willing buyer and willing seller. And at the time, I may have gotten thrown into the deep end in doing these transactions, but I enjoyed it and I liked what I was doing. And I said at the time it would be really cool to work with one of these smaller boutique investment banks that had vertical expertise. Now, I thought it would be cool, but I didn't actually know how to do it. I didn't know how to go about getting the job. I thought it'd be interesting. I think it'd be interesting to be a rock and roll star or a professional football player too, but I don't have a path to that either. Years later, after I had run a couple of technology companies, which is what I did after I left D&B, and I'd been entrepreneurial, I bought a company, raised debt capital, raised equity capital, bought a couple of small companies, small acquisitions to go with it, and sold it. A few years after that, while I was working for the company that had bought mine, I was approached by a recruiter who was working for a merchant bank, really a combination investment bank and private equity firm, to see if I wanted to come help them develop a practice that would both advise technology-based companies and also help the private equity firm buy them. And I immediately flashed back to my D&B days and said, this could be a path to me actually being part of and maybe even leading an investment bank just like the one that I had envisioned. And in fact, that's what happened. I worked for the merchant bank for a few years and then later left with 3 other people. There were 4 of us, and we started our own, and that was 16 years ago.
Yeah. But again, counter to what most people would believe is the path of starting your business during good business conditions. You went and started Marlin Associates during the absolute worst conditions, when there was no M&A, mergers and acquisition activity whatsoever. So why did you do that?
Might have been a mistake. When I was at the merchant bank, I made a fair amount of money in 1999 when the tech stocks were all flying high and the dot-com bubble hadn't yet burst. And then in March of 2000, NASDAQ crashed and the economy crashed. And then in 2001, a bunch of people flew airplanes into buildings in New York and DC, and the economy was doing even worse. And at that point in time, we weren't doing any deals and I wasn't making any money. And as I say to people periodically, in good times, everybody's your friend and everybody's nice. And when times get tough, you see what people are really made out of. And it wasn't the case with everybody, but there were definitely some people at the firm I was at who were behaving in ways that I did not particularly appreciate in tough times. And I wasn't making any money anyway. And I came to the conclusion that we'd been in recession throughout most of 2000 and 2001, and I forecast that in 2002, the market should turn around and start doing better. And therefore, I thought I was timing the bottom of the market as a time to go out on my own. Now, as it turned out, I was wrong on 2 fronts. One was the recession really continued right through 2002, which was our first year in business. And it didn't start, the economy didn't start coming back until late 2003. The other thing I didn't fully understand at the time is that the mergers and acquisitions business is largely a lagging indicator of the economy. When the economy starts to go south, a lot of people don't fully believe it's really going south. They think it's some temporary aberration. And so deals continue as economies start to go into recession. Eventually people figure out, oh my goodness, we really are in recession. Suddenly deals dry up, mostly because buyers go away. Sellers are perfectly happy to sell, but the buyers get scared off. And then as the economy starts to gain strength again, the M&A buyers still don't come back into the market because they're not sure if the recession's really over or not. And so not until they're all convinced that the economy has recovered do they really get back in the market. So what happened to us was, whereas I thought '02 would be a rebound year, I think we did 2 deals in '02. I think we did 1 or 2 deals in '03. I think we did no deals in '04. So it was a struggling time.
Well, as I recall, you told me you were like down to your last, few pennies. There's a lot of spaghetti dinners for a year or so.
It is true that I have some war stories from those days. I think I did tell you that I got married in September of '04, and we have a home that I've had now for 25 years, and my wife wanted to paint the house, and I told her she had a choice. She could either keep the wedding dishes that we got as wedding presents or return them and paint the house, but she couldn't do both. I wasn't taking any money out of the account, and I guess to her credit, her sense of priorities, she returned the wedding dishes and took the money, and we painted the house. And my father kept asking me, so when are you going to give up this foolishness and go get a real job? And I do recall saying to my father at the time that I'm going to make a decision about that in January of '05, because that's about when my money's going to run out. And he said, okay, so what are you going to do in January of '05 if you're not making money? And I said, that would imply that I've made a decision now and I'm just waiting until January of '05 to implement it. I'm going to look at the totality of the situation in January of '05 and then decide. And in fact, at the tail end of '04, we started to sign business. We didn't close deals, but we were starting to get mandates, and we did make money in '05.
But, another critical part of being a successful investment banker is having that big Rolodex. And even though you would work for D&B and done some specialty investment banking, I don't recall that the deals that you actually started signing up at the end of '04 actually were in your Rolodex when you started, Marlin and Associates. So how did you, meet all these people who are very adverse to, having people call them up and try to sell them things? '02, '03, and '04, we were marketing like crazy, right? I mean, and you're right. We didn't have a Rolodex of companies that were looking to sell, or people that we had talked to in that context. And in fact, when I left the merchant bank at the end of '01, was part of my employment agreement when I got there, but part of the deal was I was not allowed to take any clients or active prospects with me, and we stayed true to that. What I did have was about 15 years of industry experience, so there were a lot of people in the financial technology world, the data and analytics world, the software world that I had met over the course of the previous 15 years in various jobs. And so I had not an investment banker's Rolodex, but a Rolodex of a fair number of CEOs that I had met. And we started building databases. We started
using Google and creating lists and finding email addresses and phone numbers. And there were four of us, and we just started, reaching out, making cold calls, creating mass emails. And at the time I didn't have constant contact or any of those other things. And so we were doing mass emails, and then all of a sudden we wound up on people's blacklists because we were spamming people and sending out 300 emails at a time. And some service providers didn't like that and thought we were spammers, and we had to get whitelisted. It was an interesting time.
Well, and you think of investment bankers, and you think of going into these wood-paneled offices on in fancy addresses on Park Avenue and the like. And when you started out, you as I recall, you were like the exact polar opposite of that. What was your first office like?
So the
With four
first
people.
we started, so really December of '01, we were around my kitchen table in my apartment, and I found somebody that would create a website for cheap. And another friend of mine was a graphic designer who designed business cards and logos and the like for us as a launch present. And we went over to one of these shared office spaces, not like WeWorks, they didn't have those at the time, but it was one of these corporate office spaces. And we took an office that was commonly occupied by one person and crammed 4 desks into it. It was not easy. You couldn't back up your chair without slamming into the other guy, and you couldn't open the door all the way without slamming into somebody, but that's where we started.
Yeah. It was essential that you did that, or else you would have actually run out of money before the business turned around.
I think certainly we were trying to be frugal. We had meetings in Boston. We'd pile into my car and drive to Boston because I didn't want to pay for 4 plane tickets or even 4 train tickets. So we'd pile into my car and drive to Boston. I think it kept us frugal, kept us focused, and it allowed me to have enough money to get through '02, '03, and '04 before we started making money.
Mm-hmm. And when things started turning around, your business grew, quite well. It I don't know if exploded is the right terminology, but it certainly went from a very low level to highly sustainable business, and that's not possible without finding great people to support you and to be partners with you. So how did you find the people that are your partners?
You're right. This is a people-based business, and you need good people. You need to be able to have people who are self-starters and self-motivators, and it's not always easy. When we started with the 4 people, right after we got our first deal done, one of the original 4 left us because her father had a company that was struggling. It was also feeling the effects of the recession, and asked her to come back and help run that business. And so we lost her, and we were down to 3. And then one of the other guys that worked with us about a year later wasn't making any money, was getting married, and went out and found a job at a bank that would pay him a real salary, and it was hard to say no. Fortunately, I had been talking to somebody else who could come in and replace that person, and so, but we were at 3 for a long time. Those other 2 are still with me. The one of the ones who was originally and the one that came in sort of a year later are still with me, and they are exactly what you would want, which is smart, self-starting people who, to this day, along with one other, form the sort of core management team of this company. Without them, we wouldn't be here.
And so they were working with you at the boutique investment banking firm, or
The
where did
original
they come
four
from?
were, and then two of those people left, and so there's still myself and one other that were at the merchant bank, and then we brought in somebody who actually he's the only guy amongst us who's actually had a traditional investment banking background. So he was at Piper Jaffray, Alex Brown, and was at a boutique investment bank before he joined us. Um, but it's hard to find good people. It's definitely one of our challenges.
And so, when you started being successful and scoring deals that are pretty high profile and important deals, you've become the focus of the attention of a lot of competitors. How have you fended them off? As
I wish I'd fended them all off. We still have some real competitors. I do think that this concept of vertical expertise is important in our business. I'm not a real believer in generalist anything when it comes to professional services. So, doctors have got a bunch of specialists, and when you need an orthopedist, you need an orthopedist, and when you need a brain surgeon, you need a brain surgeon. And, I don't want a generalist doctor operating on my brain or on my heart or on my cancer. I want somebody who is a specialist and yes, there are certain common skills that all doctors need to have, but then there is a level beyond that of vertical expertise that's required. I feel the same way about attorneys. I don't, my real estate lawyer should not do my will, and nor should either one of them do divorces or intellectual property. There are common skills that all lawyers need, and then there is vertical expertise. What's helped me is that the investment banking business has historically largely been a bunch of generalists. They are often people who are smart people. They know how to value transactions. They know how to structure deals. They know how to negotiate. They know how to conduct an auction. But those are all sort of general skills that all bankers ought to know. But they don't know enough about the industries that they serve. And that's been our advantage. It's been our competitive advantage throughout, is having vertical expertise to go along with what I'll call our horizontal expertise.
And the businesses that you've served are, changing pretty rapidly. I mean, how do you, stay up on, what your clients need and why they think you are the expert in their businesses?
You're right. It is changing rapidly, and we have to keep up, or else the competition comes in and even if don't have more vertical expertise than we do, if we don't keep up, it's hard for us to argue that we have more than they do. Mm-hmm. So in the last couple of days, I've been talking to a company that provides the technology and infrastructure to cryptocurrency brokers. Mm-hmm. Now, they're not a cryptocurrency broker themselves. They're not dealing with ICOs, they're not selling Bitcoin, but they're selling technology to those guys. And if we don't understand what's involved and how closely that technology is related to the foreign exchange brokerage business, we can't have intelligent conversations with them. So you're right, the markets change and we have to change with them.
And so how do you go out and do that? Do you pull in advisors to teach you about cryptocurrency infrastructure, or do you, talk to enough potential clients that you pick it up? How do you do that?
All the above and more. We regularly circulate articles amongst ourselves here in the organization that people ought to read. We regularly meet with people who are in these space, and then we write up notes about it and circulate those notes to other people in the organization. And on occasion, we call in experts to help us. So it's really all of the above.
And investment banking is known as a pretty dog-eat-dog world. Every man for himself, and you've kept a very stable group of people that have worked as a coherent team, and you operate with a very different culture than most investment banks. How did you do that? How do you keep people working, focused on the team rather than going and just winning it for themselves?
It's not easy, and you're very right. The investment banking world has traditionally been, and is in most cases, a group of people who, so to speak, eat what they kill. Mm-hmm. And you can have two people, not only two senior people, but often two junior people who are sitting right next to each other, and one can make twice as much money as the other. And the junior person was just sort of fortunate enough to be working with somebody on a big deal that closed. The one next to him was working on some big deal that didn't close. And so one of them got paid a lot of money and the other one didn't. And it does not exactly foster a culture of people working together. When I was at the merchant bank, they tried to foster more of a culture like that by creating analyst pools and saying bonuses would be pooled, but it still didn't really work because people still got paid more money if they were part of the deal that closed than if they weren't. I did come out of the Marine Corps, in which the team ethos was one of the primary drivers of just about everything we did in the Marine Corps. And there was an ethos of, more than anything else, protecting your buddy, helping your buddy, having your buddy's back, and trust. If you are manning a combat outpost, the best way to do it is have one person assigned to look off to the left and somebody else assigned to look off to the right, and you have to trust that the guy next to you is going to be monitoring the area he's supposed to. Otherwise, you're trying to do both, and then it doesn't work. And you have to trust that the guy stays awake as well. And so we did try to build an organization here of trust, and we've done it in several ways, including the compensation scheme. It's not only the compensation scheme, but that is always a part of it. And there, with a couple of exceptions here, when a transaction closes, everyone here gets a paycheck. That ranges from our office manager, who gets a paycheck, to our marketing manager, who gets a different size paycheck, to some of our associate and VP level people who get a bigger paycheck. And that paycheck is fixed. They know exactly how much it is. It doesn't matter whether they were part of the transaction or not, and they get it every single time there is a transaction. They know what it is. Now, we do still have a discretionary bonus at the end of the year that is much more subjective, but it is, what it's not is based on some quantifiable dimension based on how much money they were responsible for bringing in. That's actually not a factor. It's a factor of largely judgmental, how much they contribute to the organization. It's not only compensation, but I recognize that humans are compensation driven, and if you don't have a compensation structure that sort of reinforces the team spirit, that all the other things may not be enough. But it works. We have a transaction I was just working on with some senior people, and one of the senior guys is working on a whole bunch of deals, and without coming to me or anybody else. He reached out to one of the other senior people and dragged him into the deal, and the other guy was happy to step in and take over. And there's no discussion about, well, I'll get 25% and you'll get 35%. And it just worked together. We do a number of other things, one of which is we treat people like adults. We have no vacation policy. We have no sick leave policy. We have no personal days policy. If you are sick and want to stay home, then stay home and don't come in and infect us. We're not counting your days sick. If you want to go to Australia for 3 weeks and trek, just make sure you don't leave your buddies in a lurch, and be a responsible adult. And if you need to stay home because somebody's delivering a refrigerator to you, or your parents are in town, then the same things apply. So we want everybody to be responsible adults, and it works. And we have people go and trek Australia, but they bring their laptop and their cell phone with them, and they call into meetings, and then they go back to trekking. And if they need to do that, or they hand it off to other people, but it has largely worked.
Well, you wrote a great book. I love it and got a lot out of reading it, The Marine Corps Way to Win on Wall Street. But why did you do that? That's a huge undertaking, writing a book.
Yes, well, you would know. You've written at least 2, and I think are working on a 3rd, as I recall. Right? I think you asked me why I did it. At least I didn't know what I was getting into. You did it, and now you're doing it again for the 3rd time. I didn't know what I was getting in for. I had this idea of writing the book for quite some time before I actually started writing it. And it grew out of conversations I had with people where I would get aggravated at things that I would see people do, not only investment bankers, but including investment bankers. And I would see people do things and be written up in the newspaper, and I would say, why do people do that? Why can't they just do things the way I was trained in the Marine Corps? They'd have at least as much success, maybe more, and they'd be embarrassed a lot less often. And people would say, oh, why don't you write a book about it? And I said, my problem is that after I've said about 3 or 4 sentences, I don't know what else I would say. And so at some point I began assembling ideas into a virtual folder on my desktop, which I cleverly called Book. And when I would either wake up in the middle of the night with some idea of a theme, or when I would see an article of interest, I would just sort of either write myself a note or take a copy of the article and throw it into the Book folder. And then at some point I tried to get a little more serious about it, and I took that folder and over the course of a couple of weeks tried to look for patterns and tried to organize all of my various notes into subcategories, which eventually became chapters. And then at some point I tried to string all that together in a narrative that was about 100,000 pages long, which I sent to a friend to look at, and he probably said it was really boring. But eventually I figured out how to morph it into a book, but it was a process that took several years.
Well, it's a great book, and I got a lot out of it. And you're like a great role model. I appreciate all the hours you spent with me describing the intricacies of how you created your business and the like, and that I've been able to use in my book, Building on Bedrock. And you are the epitome of what can be accomplished by somebody who is willing to learn and master, a set of skills that you weren't born with. You weren't, born with all the skills that you now, apply so ably and distinguish yourself in one of the most competitive businesses on the planet. So, I hope, I know that our audience here is going to be really interested in your story, and I thank you so much for for being willing to sit down with me yet again and share some of your story on video today. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Good luck with your book, which, by the way, I read, and I learned a whole bunch about not only about about Sam Walton, but about a number of the other people that you've interacted with over time, including the vendor in Venice Beach, a place where I hung out for a little while. So it was very interesting, and I learned a few lessons from that as well. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, we've reached the end of another episode of From the Ground Up, and I'd like to close by thanking you again, Ken, for being on the show. I also would like to thank my production team from Microframe Media, and most of all, the audience that we're generating here, bigger and bigger audiences, and I thank them for their attention and caring about what Bedrock Entrepreneurship is all about. So thank you very much, Ken.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
See you soon. Okay, bye-bye.